All right, so let's take a look at these questions. And what we really want to see is, can we answer the questions based on the information that we have here, or do we need to know something else? So I've looked at each of these. The first one seems to be mostly you're going to have to rely on your own knowledge. The second one, I think you can answer all the questions based on the information provided, because they all are referencing different paragraphs. This one, I think you can answer with the questions that are presented here, or the information. I think all three of the first question you have to answer on your own, and then the other ones you can answer based on the information provided. So here, I went through, I read the questions first, and then I read the passage, and uh, it talks about what sort of happens after the disintegration of the Abbasid Caliphate, and then also what do we know about the Abbasid Caliphate. And this certainly describes that the Abbasid Caliphate disintegrated. It also says that there was some fear that Islam would disappear, and that was the premise that the Shiite revolutionaries said that that would help Islam sort of revive itself. Um, so I took that into account as I was looking at the questions. This led to which of the following political developments of the Islamic world? It doesn't address any of those in the question itself. It implies that something happened with Shia Islam after the Abbasid Caliphate, but it doesn't directly state it. So again, you're going to have to rely on your own knowledge. I think I saw that the answer was the rise of the Turkic states, but again, that's going to have to be based on what you know happened after the Abbasid Caliphate. Despite the disintegration of the Caliphate, Islam continued to spread. So we have to look at these and say which one of these led to Islam spreading. Missionaries is always a good answer because for Christianity and Islam and even Buddhism to some extent, they are missionary, can be missionary religions. Muslim eunuch Zheng He was a sailor, if I recall correctly, and so I don't think that that would play into it all that much. Um, but so I would probably do missionaries because again that's a great way for religions to spread. And then the combination between religious and political aspects in the Abbasid state concept of rulership is best reflected. Well, you're going to have to answer that based on your own knowledge. I certainly think this one would be the answer that I would choose. For all of the other questions, it looks like you can use the passage to answer the questions. So it says, which of the following best describes a claim made in the first paragraph in the inscription? It talks about King, His Majesty Adaravam, and he declares that this statue was for the benefit and salvation of happiness of all creatures. So, even though they use the term or they talk about being a Buddhist teacher, that is talking about Dharma, not Adit Warman. So I would say that it's either statues of Buddhist divine figures could spiritually benefit everyone, or it also implies certainly that statues of Buddhist teachers were revered because they're referencing it. So, but right now I would say that 3 is probably the closest or best describes the claim. The claim in the second paragraph that the king has become free from all physical desire, I would say that that certainly talks about, well, if you're free from physical desire, then that means you're not worried about, money, and you're not worried about health, and you're not worried about, just different physical desires. So you have attained spiritual perfection. So that's the closest one from my perspective. Which of the following is an argument in the second paragraph of the inscription? In the second paragraph, they talk about, that he has, because of his, virtue, he has done lots of great things, right? And so spiritual attributes and worldly achievements made him a powerful, legitimate ruler. That certainly would be implied. They don't really talk necessarily about the attention to the welfare of his subjects, if I recall correctly. And they don't necessarily address his knowledge of science and ships. So the A would be the one that I would choose. Okay, so Mayan economy. These again can be answered through the reading of the passage. Which of the following pieces of evidence most strongly support the author's conclusion? So they talk about that exotic goods were exchanged over long distances. So that's one. I don't think they're talking about Maya city-states and neighboring states. They address specifically long distances. And then uh, the exchange of exotic goods went hand in hand with the exchange of information. I don't recall them. Oh, okay, it does say their exchange surely went hands in hands with exchanges of information. So if we're going here, which of the following pieces of evidence most strongly supports the author's conclusion about the importance of exotic goods? Certainly, the fact that they were exchanged over long distances implies that they're important because it's a lot of effort, but this is a more direct statement from the passage. So we're saying we have to ask ourselves, are they looking for the direct answer or are they looking for an implication? Um, so pieces of evidence, I would say this is a strong piece of evidence, okay? This is more of a conclusion, right? The exchange of exotic goods went hand in hand with the exchange of information is a conclusion. But I'd be torn between A and C based on, what do we need to, what's sort of the best answer? And I'd just be torn with those two. The author directly uses all of the following pieces of evidence to support his argument about the relationship between exotic goods and the power of the Maya rulers, except that. So I do not remember seeing that the Mayan rulers prohibited nobles and priests from wearing certain types of exotic goods. I do not remember seeing that. So do we see things about so we see things about using them in ceremonies. We see things about vassals, and we see things about rituals, but we don't see anything about prohibiting nobles and priests. So I would choose that. Which of the following does the author cite most directly to support his argument in the third paragraph of the importance of exotic goods? So this is where we talk about the exchanges of information, scientific knowledge, writing, and models of political organization. And I believe, and they talk about literally unified patterns of behavior in religion, science, and warfare. So these high status goods held together the Mayan world, and they unified patterns of behavior because they were like either rituals or they were used as treasures and rewards. So which of the following does he cite most directly? Does not talk about sophisticated astronomical tables. He does talk about science. The emergence of a unified Mayan kingdom based on new political models. They talk about organization, but they don't specifically talk about that. The emergence of new systems of writing based on early Mesoamerican systems. They address writing, but they don't specifically talk about it being a new system of writing. So given that they talk about unified patterns of behavior in religious science and warfare, and this is unified patterns of behavior in warfare, science, and religion, I certainly would select that. Okay, last one, I think, or second to last one. All right, so this is a passage about, hey, we've just gone through this challenging time, and we need to keep people from asking for excessive wages, right? And so we're just ordering basically that everybody keep the same wages that they had 5 years ago. The terminology used in the opening sentence of the decree was most directly influenced by which of the following? Let's look at the first sentence. I, Edward, by the grace of God, King of England, sent this decree to the Reverend Father in Christ, William, by the grace of God, Archbishop of Canterbury, Supreme Church Leader of all England. All right, so it's just talking about religion. And I would say the deep influence of Christianity on medieval society and culture. Now, it talks here about the notion that the Pope is the supreme leader of the church, but they don't address the Pope. They're talking about the leader of the Church of England, so I would do C. The need for legal action to address grave inconveniences that might result from the labor shortages described in the passage most likely resulted from. I immediately went to A, the agrarian nature of medieval European economies and the reliance on coerced labor. Coerced meaning forced labor, right? Because all these people who had land were basically dependent on workers, and if those workers rebelled, then that would be very dangerous to the ability to provide food for the country. So their reliance on coerced labor was primarily how to prevent the grave inconveniences that would result from labor shortages. Now, this talks about direct legal action, probably true, but not really what they're addressing. High social rank and economic standing of plowmen in medieval English society. not really applicable. And I don't know if I would talk about high social rank. I mean, plowmen, when I think of a plowman, I think of a farmer, certainly powerful in the sense of what they provide, but I don't think of them as having high social rank. And then the presence of guild regulations, it's applicable on some level, and it certainly became more uh, powerful, the guilds, but that's not what we're talking about. We never talk about a certain number of hours each week. So A would be what I would select. The process of consultations with nobles and the clergy of the realm in the making of his decree best reflects which of the following. When I see that, I think, you're not going to hear a pharaoh or a dynasty, an emperor in China talking about consultations with nobles and clergy. And we know that England had the Magna Carta, which means that the king had some of his powers limited. And we know that the feudal system is based on this kind of relationship between the king and the lords and everybody. So I would say that this talks about the emergency of the concept that parliaments rather than kings had ultimate political authority in European states. But that is, the timing here is off because I think 1351, we're not really talking about parliament being preeminent at that point. So I think the one that I would choose would be the fragmented, decentralized nature of Europeans' feudal monarchies. That what they're really talking about is that it's not just one massive. I'm torn a little bit on this one because this is talking about feudal monarchies. These two, A and B, even though parliament is a little bit it's a little bit like of a term that I wouldn't really use at that period of time, although parliament existed. I would say either A or B, and I might now start leaning towards A, although I want to reserve the right to say that the decentralized nature of. No, you know what? I'm changing my mind. I'm going with A because when they're talking about parliaments, they're talking about people who are limiting. No, I'm going back. I'm torn here because bottom line is the king is still the one who's going to be making the decisions. So I would not say that the parliament at this point had ultimate political authority in European states. It wasn't true. But what they're talking about is that in this situation, in England specifically, and in other countries, the king is not an absolute monarch, at least during this period of time. So I guess I would select A. All right, last one. And if I recall, this one is one that doesn't, you have to answer based on your own knowledge. Which of the following was a continuity in the development of African states? This one I was looking at and I'm like, I would just have to base on my own knowledge or what you're reading about. So it's talking about how this person, this embassy or this ambassador from King of Ethiopia came to Italy and talked about that Ethiopian was a Christian kingdom and that it was very civilized. So which of the following was a continuity in the development of African states? Here it talks about, that African states such as Ethiopia maintained close contact with South and East Asian states, but rarely had contacts with Europe. I mean, I suppose that's implied if this is a new development. I would probably say, despite geographical barriers, some African states were able to maintain diplomatic and cultural contacts. African states needed to maintain friendly diplomatic relations with Europe in order to expand their empires. I think this one is probably the one that I would choose. Which of the following continuities in the development of African states in the period circa 1200 to 1450 explains the prevalence of Christianity in Ethiopia? Certainly, I would be looking for African states. Some African states' religious traditions continue to be influenced by cultural transfers dating back to earlier centuries. Certainly, that would be true. Some African states were famous for their religious toleration and allowing multiple religious traditions. That might be true, but I'm not sure that explains the prevalence of Christianity. African states' official religions were typically syncretic, which means mixed together of several different religious traditions, while African populations mostly continued. I would probably go with this one. African political elites often adopted monotheistic religions such as Christianity and Islam. That is probably what I would choose. Which of the following was a key similarity in the policies of the rulers of African states such as Ethiopia during this period? Key similarity. This is very unlikely. A. This is certainly possible. They could face challenges, but honestly, given that we're talking about in the context of this passage, I wouldn't gravitate towards that. They sought to achieve economic self-sufficiency by restricting trade contact with other societies. Certainly possible, but I don't know that I would go with that one. I would say here, and again, this is something where, the question is, have you been given some information about the African states that you can rely on? And if you have, then you can use them here. But we're not really answering this question, right? We're just talking about how we're going to address it. If you're looking at your multiple choice, the first thing I would evaluate is, am I able to answer the question? Am I basically being asked to answer the question by just reading the passage, right? Or am I being asked to bring in my own knowledge? That will help you focus as you're doing the test. Hopefully that helps.